Okay, so this is the Sound Sommelier here with talking with Gensu Dean. What's your earliest memory of hip hop?
Oh man, earliest memory of hip hop, I would say it's somewhat foggy, but it was around Planet Rock. Um, Planet Rock, maybe it's like that. Run DMC. My older sister I think we were in Kentucky at the time, and my older sister would come back from parties, and she would, be talking about the music and the dances, and she would be, singing what the music was playing there. And I remember her talking about it's like that, and then that's the way it is. And it was kind of intriguing. I was like, kind of different. And so at that time, there was no hip hop on the radio. So I was intrigued by what is this new sound that she keeps talking about. And at some point, I heard probably Run DMC or something from African Bambaataa. Like, I was on a military base, so how the music was distributed and how music flowed was a little bit different. Sometimes we would get stuff relatively early, and then sometimes we would be late. And so it's really foggy around that time. I just remember being affected by it, whatever I heard. And
do you remember how old you were about?
Oh man, I was a little kid. I wasn't old enough to enter breakdancing contests without a teacher. So, I'll say that I needed a parental sign off to join breakdance contests.
Wow. That's one of my favorite videos, the Run DMC Jason Evans. So as you mentioned, your father was in the Army, so you spent a lot of your childhood moving from city to city. Did you still feel a sense of home wherever you were based?
Not really. The term home is subjective. And so for us, every 3-4 years, we were on the go as a family. And so that just became the norm. Anytime we were somewhere longer than that, it was abnormal. But I would say yes. At some point, you either break or you acclimate, and because that was our life, we just acclimated to always being the new kid class. This is Eddie. He's so that just became a way of life. So I guess yes to your question. But there was no real. I didn't feel rooted anywhere. If that makes sense. And, once we got settled, then yeah, it was home. But I never felt rooted anywhere.
Right, you didn't get attached.
Correct.
Which styles of music do you recall hearing when you were younger, whether it was in your house or on the base or?
So, like most typical Black families in the 70s, 80s, there was a lot of Motown. There was gospel on Sundays. My parents, both my parents were from or are from Jackson, Mississippi. So being from Mississippi and that close to New Orleans, there was a lot of meters, a lot of funk. Well, not a lot of funk, but there was definitely some meters.
Enough, yeah.
And ironically, my father was really big into Westerns. So there was some country that was played, and like Frank Sinatra. My dad was really big on Frank Sinatra, like so much so that we put a quote from Frank Sinatra on his tombstone be upon him. So it was weird, but the dominant music was soul, Motown sound, and gospel.
You mentioning country reminds me of your Rhythm Roulette episode where you're like, that's the one music I just never really latched on to.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's one of them that I just can't hang with.
Yeah, I never really I never really could rock with it, but there were some artists, like a lot of artists in the late '60s, early '70s,
Hmm.
that would transcend the
Right.
parameters of their genre.
Hmm.
And so there are some Kenny Roger records that I rock with.
Right.
There are, there are some Chet Atkins, who
Hmm.
was a guitarist, acoustic guitarist, who dealt with like instrumental country, but sometimes, so there were moments.
Yeah,
A lot of artists in that time were experimenting with sounds and stuff like that, but
I agree.
just standard country that just it just wasn't my thing.
Same. Were you already making music before you graduated from high school?
Yes, but not professionally. Um, we were at that time doing what I came later to know was labeled as pause tapes.
Hmm.
Um, we were doing, I think my man Raleek had got a hold of like a little Casio SK5. I
Nice.
don't stole it or something. I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Hmm.
I remember, but he got one from Walmart or something, and so we were putting together little things like that, and um, we were listening to a lot of loops and just imagining and dreaming.
Hmm.
But definitely there were some things I was crafting, but just not professional, not
Right.
not anything I would ever want to leak. But yeah, I was playing with some things.
Nice. So at what point did you realize you wanted to pursue a career in music?
You know,
Or
I
it just kind of happened?
I think it kind of happened. Like the passion and the dream was always there. I
Hmm.
don't think I ever sat down seriously to ask myself, can I actually do this as a profession?
Right.
Um, I just kept working at the craft and dreaming at the same time, kind of
Hmm.
simultaneously. Um, but there were moments in my life where I start to see the reality that, oh wow, this you actually could professionally do this.
Right.
And so I don't think there was a moment where I said, hey, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Because I don't think I realized at one point that you could do that. It seemed so far. Um,
Hmm.
Looking at, Pete Rock and Large Professor and all of my heroes, Diamond D, Showbiz, they seemed like giants.
Yeah.
And it seemed like, okay, that's them, on Mount Olympus, and I'm just down here enjoying it. Like I can never join them. That's not a thing. You don't join
Hmm.
the gods,
Right.
But as time went on and as the industry changed and things became more accessible, opportunities became more frequent.
Hmm.
Maybe at that time I may have realized that, oh, I can actually do this professionally. But there was no one defining moment where that occurred. It just
Hmm.
just wasn't a thing.
So you mentioned Pete Rock and Large Professor. Were they some of your earliest influences?
Yes. um, Everything was in, as RZA would probably say, in chambers. Everything was in stages. It's like the fundamentals of math. You
Hmm.
start with a basic uh, fundamentals, and then it evolves and becomes more
Right.
complex. And
Hmm.
so is it for hip hop, as well as my passion and desire for this music. And early on, when I was just moving around like a worm and breakdancing, um, the influences were different. As I got serious about the music aspect and being a practitioner in the music, then the influences started to change.
Hmm.
So Marley Marl was an early
Nice.
influence because his records, they stood out. When
Mhm.
Biz dropped, when Kane dropped, when Shantae dropped, when
Mhm.
Shan dropped, it just sounded edgier and it was just different. And so
Right.
I started to focus in on, wow, why does their music sound different from everyone? What's going on with that? And so Marley, he's Peace to Marley. He was a major influence early on, and then you start, if you're studying the craft, you start to see the music take on a different shape. And
Right.
so what the Bomb Squad was doing was groundbreaking and earth shattering. And what 45 King was doing was
Yeah.
groundbreaking and earth shaking. And if you had at that time, because there was no internet, there was no Instagram, but being on a military base, a lot of my friends were from New York. So they would come back with Red Alert tapes after the summer. They would come back with Red Alert tapes and BLS tapes. So I started hearing Paul C. production. I started hearing Main Source. And I'm thinking like, wow, it's changing again. Like what's going on with this?
Mm-hmm.
And so the best way you can, not to evade your question, but
That's fine.
the best way you can at that time, you tried to keep up with the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so the influences change with the sound that you acclimate to, that you start to
Right.
magnetic to.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those guys, all the way back from the Houdini records, all the way up until now, all of those guys influenced me in some way. They all had music that touched my spirit. And there were a lot of underground producers that never really broke like on a national level that
Right.
also had an influence. So your question is a very broad question if a person is being true to self, because we have to first define what is an influence. What influence?
It doesn't. An influence doesn't even have to be someone that everyone knows about. You could have been like, there was this guy that lived next door that.
Exactly. And there were a lot of that. There was this Korean dude when I was living in Tennessee named DJ Eddie B. And Eddie B, he ironically he went to the opposite high school as me, but when breaking was starting to kind of fade away, everybody was kind of getting into to rapping and performing from that aspect. And Eddie B was real ill with the graffiti. He had like the ill graffiti
Nice.
trucker hats, and he had the jean jackets. And I remember going to his crib, and as I'm going in his garage that he had his little setup, Eddie B is cutting up James Brown records. And I'm going, whoa, wait a minute, that's what they're doing? They're using I thought they were using like live bands. I had no knowledge of sampling or anything like that. And so he would be an influence on my life because he let me know that, oh, wow, they're actually using some of these records. So every beat maker and record digger that you interview that says anybody that they name, that's who influenced me. Because it's all the same. Those guys are pillars in this music and this culture.
Indeed. Did you have a mentor who supported you in the beginning? Anyone that kind of helped you break into the industry a little bit?
Not really, because when I got into it, mum was the word. Secrecy was everything.
Right.
And if you wasn't part of a crew, a knowledgeable crew, you were just on your own to figure it out. However, having said that, there is a producer that doesn't really get the credit he deserves, which, no surprise to everyone.
Right.
The brother name is Andy C. Peace to Andy C. He's out of Chicago. And Andy C, he came up at the same time as No ID.
Oh, okay.
So Andy C was just as influential in the Chicago area, establishing Chicago hip hop as No ID. Andy C just was a little bit more reserved, and at some point took a different career path. I think Andy started working with more R&B artists.
Okay.
But there was a moment in my development that Andy had heard some of my music and reached out to me and provided some priceless insight, especially on records.
Nice.
especially on records. And I'm forever grateful to him. I would consider Andy a mentor from the perspective of very selfishly he gave up some information, and that just wasn't a thing back then. And
Right.
we didn't really know each other at the time, and yet and still he was like, man, look for this record, look for this record. This record has drums. This record has drums. This has loops, and I was just writing it down, and I was blessed to have a spot where I went and had damn near everything on the list.
Nice.
He was like, man, I'm not telling you no more stuff. You had all that. But yeah, Andy C would have been a mentor. There were people that were, we were all coming up together and we were mentoring each other.
Right.
Like my brother and really close friend, David Banner, whatever he knew that I didn't know, he gave it to me. Whatever I knew that he didn't know, I gave it to him. So we were in the South making hip hop, which wasn't really a popular thing at the time. And so we would just mentor each other. We would hug and we would do what we could for one another. So there were mentors on that level as well.
I appreciate that. After you decided to focus on production, did you have machines in your setup that you gravitated towards more than others when making beats?
I know I had dreams about machines. I had dreams. The first professional drum machine that ever laid eyes on, that I still have this weird connection to, was the MPC 60, the Mach 2 version. There was a producer, incredible DJ named Wayne Ill. He was in Killeen, Texas, military town. And I remember Wayne telling me he was about to take out a loan for almost $3,000 to buy a drum machine. And I'm looking at him like, are you crazy? Like $2,000? Like, but at that time, my mind was still pause tapes, Walmart, SK5 keyboard. I hadn't gotten there professionally, mentally. And Wayne, he did what he said. He was a man of his word, always has been. And Wayne got that 60, and I went over to his house, and it was like life altering. Put my hands on it, and while I'm doing it, I'm thinking, oh man, this is what they are using. This is what Pete Rock is using. This is what Large is using. This is it. This is a professional sampler. Like all these ideas that are bursting and exploding in my mind, I can get them out on this machine. So, of course, I barely had $20, let alone $2,000. I didn't get a professional sampler until the early 90s. I was in Japan. A really good friend of mine, Yoruba, we were in Japan. We had a group where we were living in Japan, and we put our money together and bought an EPS, an Insonic EPS, and that became the foundation of me being serious about music production. Like it was like going from boys to men type of situation. And I used that for many years, probably till the mid to late 90s. And then I started pursuing other equipment. But to your question, early on, I remember when Mecca and the Soul Brother came out. But prior to the album release, there was a publication called Rap Sheets.
I remember Rap Sheets.
Rap Sheets. There was an article in Rap Sheets. I think Soul Man, peace to my man, Phil Soul Man. I think Soul Man interviewed Pete Rock because he had a column called World of Beats. And they had an advertisement for Main Ingredient. And it was from the photo shoot for the album. and Pete Rock had the SP 1200 and all these records, and I cannot tell you how many hours I spent staring at that. Because that was the first. Producers didn't really do that.
Right.
Maybe there's a photo of them in the studio. I think on the backside of EPMD, they're in the studio, and Caleb Boss has his arm on the SP12, but you can't really see it. Like, it just wasn't a thing to like reveal, right, your weapons. And when I saw that, I stared at it for hours and hours and hours and hours. So maybe that answers your question. I stared at that, even though I had the EPS. I stared at that thing. That was a long time desire to have that.
I'm not even a producer, and I want an SP.
Yeah, exactly.
As someone who's been in the business for more than 20 years, what are your thoughts on digital production versus analog?
Well, I think the digital analog discussion, I don't think it's just to put it in context, I don't think it's a right or wrong discussion.
Right.
I think it's a preference.
It's
a preference. And when you start dealing with personal preference, it's extremely subjective. All
right, so I'll rephrase. What's your personal preference?
My preference is analog. And that's primarily for two reasons. One, that's the way I learned and I'm comfortable with. And two, there is something about the sound, something about the process that that I enjoy. But again, it's not a right or wrong discussion. It's a preference, which is extremely subjective. But I just prefer analog. I do think analog is warmer. And I like the process, the physicality of doing something analog. It can be a little bit more cumbersome. And so I kind of like that.
No, it's the same way, like when people are like, why do you still listen to records? It's that warm. Yeah. Do you have any go-to digging spots? Like even if it's like, are there cities that you prefer that have like better selection or?
Oh, come on now.
I mean, you don't have to answer. All right. So without giving that away, what would be an ideal digging spot for you? Like you walk in and you see like X, Y, Z.
An ideal digging spot for me would be no other beat diggers there. Okay. No evidence of any other beat diggers there. Because then I can take my time. And I don't have to do the speed digging. I can relax. Because early bird gets the worm. But the environment matters. There is a spot in Dallas that was actually opened by a few friends of mine, and it's called Josie Records. And what I was telling those guys, and like I said, they're friends, and so I was telling them what I like about Josie. The environment is amazing. The way they have it designed, how spaced out everything is, you don't feel like you're on top of or a person's next to you. You don't feel cramped. They have couches. They have multiple listening stations, and so you don't feel rushed and like you got to wait in line. Like I think it's like 5 or 6 listening stations. The prices are extremely reasonable. The dollar section is insane. It'll take you a good 5 hours to go through the dollar section. So I love that. And so after they had the grand opening and all of that stuff, and I realized that the environment does matter. Prior to that, I didn't really give it a thought. I just, I'm in a record store, I'm gonna go dig. But after that experience, I realized that wow, the environment really does have an effect on the experience. So big up to Will and Luke and the whole Josie team. That spot in Dallas is really dope.
Which genres do you spend the most time with?
Oh, come on now. Try to get me in trouble.
Why is that getting you in trouble? You may have one that you have more success with, but I get that could kind of be like.
Without being evasive, I will answer that question like this. I realized early, probably after, like, when I first got a sampler and was trying to take it seriously, I realized that I create something that I call mood music.
Okay.
I'm a very passionate person, very I would say passionate. I wouldn't say emotional, but I'm a very passionate person, and moods matter to me. So the reason there isn't, I said all that fancy stuff to say this, the reason there isn't one genre that I focus on is because it depends on my mood.
I get that.
It depends on, I'm in Texas, so it's very hot here, but we've been having beautiful weather. And so I may go to a certain genre of music because today is so beautiful. It could be raining, or I could be traveling, and there may be a certain vibe in the air with that travel that may cause me to go, you know what, I think when I get home, I'm gonna pull such and such. So me staying like that keeps me fluid. It keeps my record collection fresh, because I don't just always go to soul records, or I don't always just go to jazz records. It depends on the mood and the environment and my attitude. That will dictate where I go in terms of genre, and whatever I'm listening to, I open up and let that tell me what to do. I don't go saying I'm going to chop this or I'm going to loop this. I just go open. A wise teacher once told me that, Dean, you need to start each day like a scholar with a fresh piece of paper in class. Doesn't matter what you already know. You start the day blank. And so I do that even with music. I sit down, I pull the record, I play it, and I listen. I let the record tell me what to do. And then, God willing, I go from there.
I like that. So kind of coming back around to Premier and Large Professor, your style's been compared to hip-hop heavyweights, Primo and Large Professor. Do you agree?
No. I would never compare myself to those brothers. No one can stand next to them because they did it when there was no blueprint. The things that Diamond did, there may have been a foundation, but there was no blueprint. The things that Showbiz did, there may have been a foundation, but no blueprint. Large, like Pete Rock, like some of my friends and close brothers have said, Dean, you're no different. You're no different than this guy, or you're no different than that guy. I don't see it. I can't say that. And I'm humbled and honored for people to do that. But I can't stand next to those guys. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for what they did and what some of them continue to do.
Right.
So I just thank Allah. I thank God for them and for what they've done and keep it moving.
I appreciate that. Your debut album, Lo-Fi Fingers, dropped in 2012 on Mellow Music Group and featured artists like Count Bass D and Prince Poe. What was your process like in crafting the record? Would you consider yourself a perfectionist? Did it take extra long because you were like, that's not the way I want it yet? Or
well, I'm gonna answer your question in reverse. Yes, I'm a perfectionist in the sense that I have to like stop myself because I'll keep going. What my process was, that was an interesting time in my life, and I had gone through a trial in my life, not like a court trial, but like a life trial. And I realized, or I was reminded, that time waits for no man. And so when I started to come through that trial, I was like full steam ahead.
Right.
And at the time, I was using a drum machine that was extremely limited, but I was on a mission. And the trial caused me to refocus and get busy. And so the beats were there. It was really just finding which artists fit well with which, with the beat.
Mm-hmm.
And the internet was still kind of fresh, and sending vocals and beats and sessions, that was still kind of a new thing. So it was kind of weird, but I was doing my best to acclimate and make it happen. And all praises due to Allah, it got done. And I was very proud of that record.
Nice.
But the process is always the same. The beats with nobody in mind, and then once the beats are done, who will fit well with what.
I like that. You partnered with Planet Asia to release the Abrasions double LP the following year, as well as Dice Game Shaken EP the year after that. What's different about your process when working on remixes as opposed to with original content?
It's a very, very good question. Original content would be, when I create, I just create. There's nobody in mind. It's either something I've heard, get it out of my mind, and have it tangible in the form of a beat, or it's I'm listening to music and then I create. I never create with the pressure of, oh, I'm going to do this beat for this artist, or I'm going to do the beat for this. I never do that. I just sit down and create. So that's kind of the process for original content. Remixes, a little different, a little bit more research in remixes. I research the artists. I listen to the original. For instance, like you brought up the Dice Game remixes, and Apollo did an amazing job. That's my label mate. He did an amazing job with Guilty. So I went and studied that record, the original.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, I studied the original version. And then I started studying other Guilty work. So I was finding what chambers has he may have touched on, but hadn't spent a lot of time in. And so I would do that in a remix, is study the artists, study their previous work, and find out, okay, well, what can I give them to stretch their creativity, stretch their abilities, but still keep it somewhat familiar to their fan base. I don't want to have something like super crazy and way out, and it makes no sense. But I definitely want it to be a Gensu Dean thing. So there's a little bit more research that goes involved when I'm doing a remix.
Nice. Do you feel joining the Mellow music family opened a lot of doors for you?
Oh, no question. Mellow, is family, and that's who I partner with. And but it's a symbiotic relationship. There are things that I have brought to Mellow that they didn't have prior to me being there. Artists that I have brought to the table that they haven't had prior to, and vice versa. And the guy that runs label, he's a real hip hop dude, and a good guy. And so I honor and respect him, and so that's the fam.
Yeah, Michael Tolles helped me set up a lot of interviews over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and a great team at Mellow.
Nice. You've also worked with artists like Guilty Simpson, who you mentioned, Lord Jamar, Sadat X, Rock Marciano, but aren't as well known as other producers. How have you managed to stay under the radar all these years?
I don't think that was by my design.
Fair.
Having said that, I think some of that comes with the type of music that I make. I have a motto. It's a personal motto. and it's a company motto with my production company. I refuse to sound like the rest. And taking such a definitive position like that comes with parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm okay with those parameters. And so if everyone, and this is no shot or shade to anyone, but if everyone is just looping up stuff and not using drums, well, good for them. But I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I refuse to be lost in the minutia of normalcy, because where I come from, the time I come from, or the cloth that I'm cut from, as they say, that's not a thing. You come to the marketplace with you. You don't come to the marketplace sounding like somebody else.
Right.
So regardless of how people digest what I just said, it's a real thing still for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to come to the marketplace as Gensu Dean. I can't come to the marketplace sounding like, producer, whoever.
Right.
Right, wrong, or indifferent, sink or swim. There's an interlude on my brother Diamond D's album, The Dime Piece. Dime Piece.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interlude before the song called Jose Feliciano, which is probably my favorite song on the whole album.
Mm-hmm.
There's a James Brown interlude where he says, I'm not, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, I'm not gonna sound like somebody else, just so you'll like me. If you don't like me, you don't like me. If I fail, it's gonna be my fault. I'm not gonna fail because I tried to sound like somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has always been my thing, is I refuse to sound like the rest.
Nice.
So maybe that's why I'm still not really that known.
You may have just answered this question, but how did you come to be known as the Grand Incredible?
That's funny. There is Criminal Minded, piece to the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Harris one of what I call one of the founding fathers, or one of the five Deli Venom. The album Criminal Minded, it was life altering for me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part on the album where they say the Grand Incredible DJ Scott LaRock. And as a kid, I was like, oh, the Grand Incredible, it's crazy. And so at some point, I don't know if someone called me that, joking, or I don't remember, but it was the Grand Imperial. At first, it was the Grand Imperial.
Okay.
So you may see, there may be some early records where you'll hear the Grand Imperial, but then at some point it changed to the Grand Incredible, and I embraced it because I thought of the Scott LaRock.
I didn't even think about that connection.
Yeah, Scott LaRock. There's a whole deep story, even with that brother's legacy and his influence early on with hip hop, especially when hip hop was becoming, into that golden era sound.
Right.
So I kept it to honor Scott LaRock.
Nice. So you've also been referred to as a 10-second Jedi master. Can you think of a story or two that may best exemplify this?
I'm honored. That unwarranted title came when I was using the SP, and there's a really good friend of mine, great DJ, named 5D. Does a lot of boogie stuff, really dope. I remember playing him beats over the phone, and he would be like, "Nah, man, you use something else with that." And I'm like, "Nah, man, come on, man. I only have the SP. Like, I don't have anything else. Just 10 seconds. That's all I'm working with." And he would be like, "Nah, man, you have a special chip." So it started to become a thing when I would play him beats, and he would doubt. I did it with 10 seconds. He was like, "Nah, that's that chip. That's the one of those beats with the chip, and it was
Mm-hmm.
hilarious. And so, I guess around that term was around some of the things that I was doing with that machine, and which I love, and I enjoyed using it, and figuring out the hurdles, which it definitely had a lot of hurdles with that machine, a lot of limitations. But figuring the stuff out was like part of the excitement and what kept me using it for so long, and why I started using it so late in my career was the hurdles. So I guess some people honored me with that title. But
The Whole Food album from you and Denmark Vesey was released in 2016. Can you explain the cover art and how it spoke to the story behind the work?
oh man, the album Whole Foods, peace to my guy, uh, Denmark. But the album title and the album cover is layered. Like many of the things I do, um, as my close brothers say, is veiled. Um, Someone asked me, what did it mean? And I told them, play the album and stare at the cover, and then you call me back and tell me what it means. And I did that even with abrasions. You look at abrasions, there's nothing written on the cover. There's no words, there's nothing. You play the record and stare at the album cover, and you tell me what it means to you. But Whole Foods, you can see that it's an eggplant. Excuse me. And the eggplant is carved in the shape of a skull. So already we're dealing with decay of something that is actually at one point pure, something that was whole food, something that was organic, something that was great for the human body to consume.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point it dealt with decadence and start to become the opposite of that, of life, which is death.
Right.
And so I will say just that and tell everyone else, listen to the record, stare at the album cover, and then hit me on Instagram or whatever and tell me what it means to you.
I like that little homework. That same year, you released Raw with even more incredible features from Diamond D, who you just mentioned, Georgia M. Muldrow, and fellow Mellow label mate Red Pill. To what do you attribute your ability to push out so much quality content?
I try to be honest as an artist. I try to be honest with myself. A good friend of mine, mentor, hero, all of the above. I remember Large Pro was sharing with me one day about stepping away from music and letting life happen. Advice from people like Mr. Walt. Spinner, DJ Spinner, man. A lot of these people, man, and I even have guys that, the world may not know, but they are brilliant in their own right. A lot of my close, friends and brothers, David Banner, my man Hakim, Akil, Swala. There's like a lot of people. Well, not a lot of people, but there's a circle that I have. Mm-hmm. Good friend of mine, Dr. DL, I call him Justice, but he's a professor of history in Maryland. And so I have all of these guys, some dealing with music, some they don't even deal with music at all. Some even artists that I work with. They have moments where they inspire you, they guide you, we hold each other up, we encourage one another, and all of that feeds into when I sit down to create what I actually do, how I actually think about it. Like, okay, I got to make sure that I'm being me, I'm doing me. I have all these people in my life that I'm accountable to. And accountability is paramount when you're trying to be one with self.
Right.
Accountability is paramount. And so all of these people, you know, Dr. David Reed and Hakim and my man Yarbrough and all these guys that I talk to, DJ Iron, I'm accountable to these people, right? And so when I play them a beat, it has to be deemed. Otherwise, they'll check me and go, what's going on here? And so to answer your question, long story short, all of that feeds into the quality of the output because you're accountable to all of these different variables. There's something that you're holding yourself to, not necessarily a standard, but I'm governed by a set of principles, whether I'm doing music or not. And these principles are universal and you cannot escape them. You can never unsee what you've seen. So whether I'm doing music or something else, these principles are always there. And so I guess that would be, excuse me, one of the driving factors of the quality of output. And I just don't want to just rush and just put anything out just to put it out. Like, what is that? Once it's out, it's forever.
Right, it'll sour your name. Yeah. How did you come to link up with Wise Intelligent for the Game of Death LP? PRT were on heavy rotation in my house back in the day.
Yeah, peace to Wise, who also is one of the 5 Daily Venom and founding fathers. Wise, I want to say we were chatting back and forth maybe during MySpace days, maybe leading into Facebook. It's really foggy. But we were talking, and excuse me, the guy Mike from the label he's a big fan of Wise, and Wise had appeared on a few Mellow music releases, and Mike and I would talk, and I would ask him, what do you think I should work with? What ideas do you have? And whatever list he gave me, Wise was always in that list. And I always thought that was weird. Like, oh, it's interesting. And I knew that Wise had never done an album with just one producer. Came close. The album Killing You for Fun, a lot of that production was with the great Tony D, peace be upon him. But there was still some other production. So he had never done, even when he worked with Shaheed, Father Shaheed, peace be upon him, it was never just all the beats by Shaheed. There was some by Tony D and etc. So at some point, the timing was right because that's, a large component of everything that we do in life. And the timing was right. And, Wise already knew how I felt about him as an artist and a writer. And I, at some point he had mutual respect for me and what I do. And so we made it happen. I'm, forever grateful and humbled by that opportunity. The music that he made was the soundtrack of my life from, let me see, 10th grade, 11th grade.
Very impressionable time, yeah.
Ma'am?
Very impressionable time.
Oh, man. And the music that they were making, Poor Righteous Teachers and Brand Nubian, literally became my theme music. So that was a huge honor to work with him.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Before I ask my next question, I just want to note we have probably less than a minute left before the live ends. Can I restart and jump back on?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. See you in a little bit.